Well, it is now time for Touch Base in Seoul. This is our segment where we talk to a wide variety of guests, and we're very pleased to have a special guest joining us today. She is Professor Jocelyn Clark of Peje University, East Asian Studies professor, also a Gayageum player whose life has been quite focused on playing and promoting Korean traditional music, specifically the Gayageum. Professor Clark, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we have a lot to talk about. KBS World broadcasts internationally, and we know that we have a lot of listeners who are interested in Korean culture. A lot of times that's mainly perhaps the more
K-pop?
mainstream, K-pop, K-drama. But some people might have an interest in traditional Korean culture as well. Specifically, though, for Gayageum, and if there are some people who are not really familiar with it, can you just sort of give your 2-minute elevator pitch on that?
2 minutes. So Gayageum is a board zither, although it might have been originally a half-tube zither.
Mm-hmm.
And a zither is kind of a misnomer because that's a German instrument.
Right.
But anyway, it's a board with movable bridges, and you can move the bridges around to change the tuning. There's 12 strings. It originally came from something modeled on the Chinese zheng in the 5th century. And of course, the meaning of the instrument is the stringed instrument from Kaya. Kaya was a country a long, long time ago that got eaten up by Shilla.
Right.
And the player from Kaya ran away to Shilla and presented the music to the king, and he didn't like it at all. And he got his own composers to rewrite all the music, and then they said it was wonderful, and that's what lets us have the instrument today. So that instrument then traveled to Japan. In fact, in Japan they don't call it the Gayageum, the characters, but they call it the Shillagum. It's a shiragi koto. That's what they call it in Japanese. So it's something that you can find in Mongolia, you can find it in Korea, you can find it in Vietnam, you can find it in China, you can find it in Japan. So it's very, it all looks the same in each country,
right.
But you can really tell the difference between the culture by listening to how each country plays this one instrument, because it sounds very, very different in each country. So Vietnam uses, straight steel strings, and it's very twangy. And Japan these days they use something called tetron. It's a kind of some kind of reinforced nylon string, very tightly strung, so you can't do any wide vibrato on it. Korea still uses silk strings, much more loosely strung. You can make really wide vibrato and lots of ornaments on and we also don't use any picks. We're just playing with the pads of our fingers. So, and each time we play a note, we're dampening the other strings, so it's a little bit like a gamelan in that way. So we only hear one note at a time. So it's a lot like singing. For me, it's a lot like singing because you only play one note at once, so you don't have to think about harmony or strumming. In China, you find the most famous piece for this kind of instrument called zheng in China is lofty mountains and running water. So you have a piece that sounds like lofty mountains and running water is this kind of harp, like vroom, vroom. You don't have this in Korean Gayageum music. It's very kind of abstract. It's built on modes and rhythm patterns, and that's what I like about it. Very rhythmic, too.
It's a fascinating explanation because, as you point out, and a lot of people will think of a violin, and there's a fiddle, and there's people who play maybe classical and perhaps other types of genre with that same instrument. With the Gayageum and I suppose derivations of it, there are such vast differences. Then our listeners would probably be curious as far as your academic career and your studies and leading you to coming here and being a professor at a Korean university. What led you specifically then to be drawn to the Korean Gayageum?
Well, I had actually started, I grew up playing Western music. I started out on the violin, like a 16th size one.
Right.
Suzuki
me
method,
too, right.
Peanut butter sandwich, pika pika boshi. And then piano, because when we moved to Alaska when I was 3, we didn't have any violin teachers. So I started playing piano, and then when I got into grade school, I started playing the clarinet. When I got into school, high school, I started playing the oboe. Yeah. And I played in the symphony. And when I was an exchange student in Japan, I studied with the Nagoya Symphony. And then when I came back from Japan, I got into college, and my school was famous for ethnomusicology, which, of course, at that time I'd never heard of. I didn't know what that was. But they were restarting their koto program. This is the Japanese version of the Gayageum. And the teacher didn't speak any English, and I thought, oh, it's a good way to just practice Japanese. If I take that class, it would be fun. It's music. Okay. And as soon as I touched the instrument, I just fell instantly in love with it.
Wow.
This is the Japanese one. But at that time, I was also studying Chinese, so I ended up in China studying the same instrument, but the Chinese version. And then I thought, oh, well, there's one in Korea too. And of course, in America, there's no Korean study. At that time, there was very little Korean studies. There was, there's a long history in America with Japanese studies and Chinese studies, especially having to do with funding and just history. Right. But really nothing about Korea, so you couldn't study anything about Korea. So I was interested in Korea, but I had no access academically as a student to anything about Korea. My mom had adopted a Korean girl. Okay. So I got more interested in Korea, and I tried to get a scholarship from the IBM Watson Fellowship. And then you compete all year and you get the next stage. So I got to the last stage and I got like runner-up. You get nothing. Oh. But I'd already set up a lot of contacts to study the Gayageum in Korea. So I contacted Kim Jinhee in New York. She's a komungo player, jazz and electronic komungo, and she introduced me to the 원장님, the director of the what they're calling now the National Kugak Center in English, 국립국악원, and so I got a scholarship directly from them. So I came here to study Gayageum in 1992, and I immediately regretted it because I couldn't understand like what's going on with this instrument. It didn't sound like the jung, and it didn't sound like the koto, which are all like harps, and they're so beautiful, and they have these loud sounds, and you play with picks, and it sounds like angels.
So it wasn't necessarily love at first sight.
No, I came really for the shape of the instrument because I wanted to compare culturally, like at the musicological project, and Gayageum was something completely different, even though they all look the same. And it took me some time to, first I started rhythm patterns, like so how can I even count in Korea? Because it's like Japan, China, America is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 1, 2. Korea, everything's in 3 with these long rhythm patterns, like 12 beats. So, you don't know how to clap along for a while. So then once you figure that out, and you figure out modes, and there's a lot of sounds that we don't have in Western music, so you have to adjust your ear. Like what's going on musically? I didn't understand it quite at first. And the aesthetic of the sort of the rough sound, you find it in pansori, you find it in komungo playing where the strings rub against the wood. You can find it. There's a lot of rough sounds, which is part of the Korean aesthetic. And here it's playing with no picks. It's very damp sound. Dark sound in a way. So that took me a long time to get, not a long time, but it took me some time to get used to. And once I did, I just fell in love with it. But it wasn't, so I understand why, especially Koreans at that time, that was 1992, that's 25 years ago. So at that time, people would say, oh, well, you will never understand. You will never be able to play Gayageum because you're not Korean, and we all grew up with this music, so it's internalized in us. But now I'm finding 25 years later that no kid grew up with any Korean sounds in their head. So, they're just as Western as I am. They're starting out with only Western music in their heads. And so I understand why it's hard for, average person to warm up to Gayageum. Because it's so foreign to their ears, even in Korea it is.
And that's actually, you illustrate a very fascinating point, because your own journey towards studying this and the struggles in the beginning and sort of developing that deep appreciation for the art form and for Gayageum, as you point out, for a lot of people, and I hear this quite a bit from people who are not used to traditional Korean music, that oftentimes it's an acquired taste, right? It's not necessarily something that you hear and you're instantly captivated by, but you gain that appreciation. But Korea itself would like to have its art form preserved, maybe promoted, maybe become more widely known like Chinese or Japanese traditional music. In your view, and I guess in a different interview, you have said that the path forward isn't necessarily going to be sort of a shoehorn method of this is traditional Korean music, take it or leave it and appreciate it, but maybe a different modern approach that still retains that traditional aesthetic. Can you kind of elaborate on what you feel is the vision for the future of Korean traditional music?
It's a question that I think all kugak players are grappling with every day.
Yeah.
We're always thinking, well, how can we promote what we love? And it's a difficult question because, people often ask me, well, how can we make this global, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I mean, the answer is you can't. Because you can't even make it national. Even we call it kugak, right? National music, but it's long time since it's been anything close to the national music. And Koreans like the idea that it's there, but they don't actually like it. So, if Koreans won't even like it themselves, you can't expect foreigners to fall in love with it. On the other hand, there's a lot of foreigners who have fallen in love with it, but they have no access to it. So I was talking to a producer in America just the other day. He's so frustrated because he loves Korean music. He wants to promote it, and he has no access to it because he doesn't speak Korean. He said that 98% of everything's streaming now, right? So 98% of the stuff that he would be interested in buying or downloading, it's all, country coded.
Right.
As a foreigner, as an outsider, you cannot even get access to it. It's
you can't just go on
wall.
like a Spotify playlist and find.
You can't do that here either, can you?
Yeah, no.
It's in America, so I can't, listen to any streaming service in America. I can't get my Netflix here. I can't get my, whatever I want to, used to getting in America, I can't get here. And the same thing for most of the Korean music that's here, you cannot get it in America. So he's very frustrated, and he was also frustrated because, he wants to produce it, and so Womex and these PAMs, these big festivals, are inviting Korean players, but then that's just the first door, and then there's no sort of structure to market these things. And the third thing he was frustrated about, he can go on YouTube then. YouTube, there's all sorts of stuff there, but nothing's in English.
Yeah.
And he's not saying that everything needs to be translated, but if there was a little thought put into language, then he thinks, because he loves it himself, that a lot of other people would find it more accessible just with more English.
Yeah, and that doesn't seem like a tall order. It seems like maybe a couple of people dedicated to a project like that could help facilitate what we see. Then I suppose as we kind of get towards the end of our discussion, I wish we had more time, but in your view then, as far as what you're doing locally here as a scholar, as a teacher, and as someone who is deeply passionate about this art form, what do you hope will happen, not just for your personal career, but also for this form of art that you wish the rest of the world can also enjoy?
My fear with Gayageum music, or even all kugak music, I mean, we have to go forward, and how can we go forward without losing the essence, the roots of Gayageum music? And for that, it's years and years of training, and that's hard for especially young players to go through, especially with the teachers. The teachers are really scary. My teacher's really scary. I shed a lot of tears and got yelled at a lot and got sent home, and to come back from that, it that takes
perseverance
you have really to have grit, as they say.
Yeah.
And so my fear is that without that training, you can't make something new that still has that Koreanness attached to it. You can, the instrument is just a board with strings on it. So you can play that in any way. It's going to make a nice sound.
Right.
But is it going to make a Korean sound? And that's the question as we move to, everybody's moving to 25-string zithers, and the left-hand techniques being lost. And how do you make something really sound Korean? And if that's being lost now, especially as the older generation's always dying. But the people who are around 25 years ago at Kunikugagwan, Park Dong-jin, Pansori, and that school passed away, and now we have my teacher's generation. They're all in their 70s now. They're still still second generation, at least in this national treasure system. But these guys are not going to be around for very long either. So then it's up to us. And did we receive it from them or not? That's the question.
Yeah, and those are some important questions that hopefully will be answered soon. And we do hope we can bring you back and hopefully further this discussion. But it's been a fascinating talk. Thank you so much for joining us despite your busy schedule, and best of luck to you. Hope to see you again soon.
Thank you for having me.